People ask me, David, should we have a set number of questions before we start? I think no, the conversation will flow. Do not worry about it. The conversation will flow and will create its own questions. Everyone, just like with Toby, I've put now another 2 pages of notes on what you've done. The question is, where do we start? Where do we start? Where do we start eating this elephant? Where does the first bite start? So let's go back to the very beginning. Right? Let's go back to concepts. The subtitle of the congressional report into the 9/11 commission, Congressional Commission to 9/11, and the failures around that was a failure of imagination. We didn't think it was going to happen like this. We should have done. We had every sign there. We were not ready. The second one, which was into Hurricane Katrina in 2005, was a failure of uh, initiative, a failure of initiative. We knew it was coming. We still weren't ready. And the third American report it was just after that, a nation still unprepared. We haven't learned the lessons. If we have any responsibility, we as a community, it is to be ready. Are we ready? I mean, that's a fundamental question. And what I saw about I like that diagram you showed just there. But somebody made a point in a previous webinar we had that organizations are really good at developing outputs, but that's not the same as outcomes. They're really great at building these things and these reports and these diagrams, and nothing changes. I was in Brussels last year for a conference on this subject, and somebody genuinely, proudly said that after 16 years, the European Council had agreed a definition of crisis, and said it in all seriousness. It was serious. After 16 years, we know what we define crisis. So the question is, Toby, are we taking this? I mean, are we taking this seriously enough, or are we sort of having reports, having outcomes, having diagrams, and at the end of the day, nothing much has changed?
I think the problem is that when bad things happen, that does concentrate the mind, and there is a short flurry of activity, and people do make improvements, but then it ceases to be front of mind. I mean, you look at some of the changes that the UK made in response to the COVID pandemic and some of the structures that were put in place. Most of those have now been dismantled, and it's I think unfortunately that's the case. I sometimes describe organisations as being recidivist, in that they revert to their previous state after a certain amount of disruption. What I do think is, because maybe this is my I'm becoming a grumpy old man, but what we are increasingly seeing is that we're living in such a volatile and uncertain world. Indeed, we started this conversation today looking at one of the new uncertainties with the present US government, that there are now so many things happening simultaneously and going on at the same time, all of which are disruptive, that maybe there will be a expectation on everyone that they raise their game on preparedness, and that resilience is not quite enough. Being able to recover more or less back to where you were before, that's very important, but actually you ought to be ready for the unpredictable, prepared for something you haven't actually planned for, and have systems which are robust enough to be able to respond effectively. Now, I hope that's the lesson, though, as I say, I get quite pessimistic, because usually after the events, you get the inquiry, you get the report, and even then, nothing seems to emerge.
Toby, as you know, anybody who uses the words black swan around me has to do 10 push-ups immediately, because there's almost no such thing as a black swan. You say we haven't planned for, but these are things we should plan for. That is what crisis management or resilience planning is for. It's exactly these disruptive events. That is what the job is about, isn't it? Being ready for these things. Do you think that we've grasped it? Because one of the things that we talk about here in the ISRM is that it seems when we hear people talk about it, the language is just not strong enough to describe it. Do you have to make a quick breakaway, Toby? You do. Okay, Ebru, I'm going to bring you in. Oh, you're back, Toby. Fine, sorry. Um, is the language strong enough? I mean, it sounds like we're using a linear language to use, to try and describe a hyper complex post-digital environment. Are we just not grasping it? Because we are living in a
I think
complex
that's
world.
true. I think the
Fine.
important point is that um, people tend to get hidebound into planning for particular events rather than looking at actually it'll be something may not be what we've planned for.
I mean, that's the adaptive, what Ebru said. Ebru, let's bring you in. I mean, because you're in New York, we're in London, you're in New York. Those are considered sort of, exemplars of what a modern big city, Western city, it looks like. Do you feel in New York that New York is it getting more resilient? Because we've been discussing resilience for the last 15 years, or is it actually more fragile? Are we just closer to absolute systems collapse in many ways?
No, no, exactly. I was thinking about this just as you were talking, because when you were giving the examples of what happened in 9/11 and what happened with Hurricane Katrina, but we experienced Hurricane Sandy here also. Just, I mean, it's been, I believe, 13 years or 15 years or so. Um, I lost track of time here, but our systems failed during Hurricane Sandy. And very similar to what happened at Heathrow, the entire dependency of systems, um, showed itself. For instance, the submersion of the transformation electric substations in water from flooding in Hurricane Sandy. In Lower Manhattan, for instance, we did not have electricity for a week. For a week. A personal anecdote, my office at that time was in Flatiron District in Lower Manhattan, and my office was accessible only with an electronic swap card, electric swap card, and I wasn't able to access the office space to get my belongings.
Mm.
Uh, Similar to what happened with the hospitals, Toby was giving the example, the emergency generators were in basements in hospitals, submerged in water. Patients needed to be rescued and moved to other hospitals. Uh, the PET station, the PET station from New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey to New York. Hoboken is a commuter town in New Jersey. The PET station was submerged and was not accessible for 6 months. 6 months. So our systems Hurricane Sandy was really a game changer for New York. Our systems were really, really vulnerable. And New York has done a lot in the last, hopefully, I'm saying, a lot in the last 10 plus years in terms of resilience planning. And that includes both nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, gray infrastructure, and social systems. But at the same time, we have a saying here in New York, we say the story of two Hurricane Sandys. Because again, we have to think about what happened to more vulnerable populations in locations like Staten Island in New York, who were extremely affected by the hurricane, did not have insurance, had a long time recovering from the disaster, versus what happened in Lower Manhattan, where, of course, it's the engine of the economy and the whole entire focus, I think, at least for the short-term recovery, was on Lower Manhattan. So that's why we call it the story of two hurricanes and Sandys. So that's something that we should not forget. I think in these discussions about equity and in urban resilience and city resilience and any of the work that we are doing. now I lost track of my thoughts, but going back, I think, to the question about if we have agile systems or if we are adaptively transforming, and what happens if we have at times of uncertainties, and these uncertainties, you and I were talking a few days ago, David, and these uncertainties, we always talk about uncertainties as climate change, climatological disasters, some type of emerging hazards, like what happened with the pandemic and so forth. But now more and more we see geopolitical crises, economic crises. What's happening currently in the US is not something that we were expecting. And just this in the last week or so, in the last 2 weeks, you may have heard FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is currently undergoing a restructuring, and most probably it's going to lose its most of its responsibilities. As far as I've heard, the most of the responsibilities will now be directed to the local and state authorities. And just last week, one of the key programs of FEMA was put in pause, and we call it the BRIC program. That's the program that's called Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. That's one of the key programs of FEMA, and it provides, I believe, about 75% of the funding to local and state communities and local communities. And this program has been put on pause. So now we have to discuss. Yes, we had a robust system in the US. We had all of the regulations, the governance system in place, policies and guidelines in place, a system in place. And this is an uncertainty that none of us could have imagined, that now we have to think and I think the question that comes to my mind is, that is a major interdependency of the resilient infrastructure, is governance. If there is no political commitment at this very high level, then even if we have all of this knowledge and all of these policies and guidelines, how can we put that into place? So perhaps then again we have to be adaptive to these uncertainties, and we have to now, like the communities, local communities, local and subnational governments will have to start thinking of new ways of finding funding. And in the US, we have, as you know, we have like different systems from state to state. In New York State, we have robust policies in place, but it's not the same in other states, some of the Midwestern states and so forth. So I think, again, going back to the issue of equity, I think we are going to see a lot of diversion in the way communities, in the way like we think about resilience and recovery in the face of disasters coming up in the very near future.